nevertheless get the general idea of what they're for. So let me do some introductions. Let me start with the candidates. We have with us tonight the man who probably holds the record for the shortest term of office at City Hall ever, elected as an Assembly member, then whisked off to Tottenham to become its MP, and later on a minister in the Labour government. Here's David Lammy. Also a former minister, ex-MP for Dulwich and West Norwood, former London minister, and as we know, one of the key figures in London bringing the magnificent Olympics to our capital, and she is Tessa Jowell. Also with us, an MP who has the knack of increasing her majority when others watch theirs wither away. Star of the House, star of TV, MP for Hackney North and Stoke Newington. Welcome to Diane Abbott. Next, a man I know to be an authority on London because we worked together almost 30 years ago on the London Daily News, which was run by Robert Maxwell. And we know he's canny because he was one of the few to actually get his money out of the old tyrant. He's an authority on transport in London and in the UK, and as we'll see, on much besides. Here's Wolmar. Now, it says something about the importance of the job that serious people now aspire to do it. Here's another one, the former campaigning lawyer, former transport minister, former communities minister, Sadiq Khan. Last but no means least, another heavy hitter, chair of the Cooperative Party since 2001, former International Development Minister and MP for Harrow West since 1997. Welcome to Gareth Thomas. So there are 6 of them, 3 on our panel. Let me quickly introduce our troika of experts. That's a popular word these days, troika. Some need no introduction, but I'm paid to provide one anyway, so I will. Welcome our own Polly Toynbee. We have a man who, among other things, knows all about the Labour Party, who's who, what's what, and where all of the bodies are buried. He's Raphael Bear. And as a man who knows virtually everything about London, it's not yet illegal to have a discussion about London without having him there, but the Surgeon General does not advise it. It's Tony Travers from the London School of Economics. Okay, right, we've got until about 8:30, and we're hoping to get as many questions in as we can. We're hoping to make this a fairly no-waffle zone. We'll ask our candidates questions. Many of those questions will come from our audience. They will have a minute to answer those questions. If they take more than a minute, they will be rudely interrupted by an electronic sound, which we can hear. There you go. We think that's not too embarrassing for them, but may well stop them mid-flow. Let's get on with it. The first question I want to ask all of you for a minute is that this is a very particular job. You all want a party badge, but actually when we vote, we're voting for you, an individual. And that's quite a big thing to take on your shoulders. So what is it about yourselves? Why do you think that you are actually equipped to fix our capital, to do what we need in our capital? Why you personally? Tessa Jowell.
Well, I'm a Londoner. I've lived here all my adult life. I've brought up my children here. They live here. My grandchildren, 4 of my 6 grandchildren live here. I love this city. That's my first qualification. The second is that this is a city facing a crisis of inequality, which we'll talk about later this evening. And I know that I can deliver the change that London needs. And I also think that I can win this election if Labour selects me.
Okay, thank you. Gareth Thomas.
I'm standing because I think I'm the best leader of the candidates before you tonight. And London needs leadership. It needs leadership on Heathrow. I'm very clear we shouldn't turn our back on the 40,000 jobs and 10,000 apprenticeships that a third runway would offer. I'm clear we need to expand and refine the congestion charge. I'm clear that fares are too high and too expensive. I'm the only candidate pledging to bring them down. So it's decisions and policies like that that I think London wants. I think London is ready for a serious debate about its future, and I'm the candidate bringing that serious debate to London.
David Lammy.
I'm standing here first and foremost as a father of 2 young children and a third that I adopted last year. My parents had died. I'm here at the age of 43. I announced back in September that the number one issue in my campaign was housing and doing something about housing. The average age of a buyer in London now is 39. It'll be 52 in a generation. I had a plan that I announced in September. I've built on that plan. I've made it the centre of this campaign. That's why I want to be mayor.
Sadiq Khan?
Labour needs a candidate that can win and win for a purpose. This city has allowed my family and me to fulfil our potential. I'm the child of immigrants, the son of a bus driver raised on a council estate, encouraged by teachers to fulfil my potential, able to go to university and become a lawyer based upon my grades going to university rather than my means. I worry about whether today's Londoners can fulfil their potential. So I've got a comprehensive plan to be tough on developers, a plan to be a living wage mayor, a plan to reduce the cost of fares for those who go to work. I believe my experiences, my values and my ideas mean I'll be a mayor who can make a difference for the better.
Okay, I can guarantee you'll get at least 1 vote.
That's my mum. Thanks, mum.
Diane Abbott.
I came here this evening from the House of Commons, where we were discussing George Osborne's welfare cuts. Now, these welfare cuts are a very serious thing for London. The benefits cap, even at its current level, has meant thousands of Londoners having to move out from their homes in the centre of London into insecure accommodation away from their children's schools. And this whole issue about the benefits cap and the welfare cap illustrates something about London. On the one hand, we're a marvellous city, which has given me everything in life. But on the other hand, we have tremendous poverty and we see social cleansing in the heart of our great city. I will be the mayor with the independence of mind and the courage to stand up against the social cleansing of London.
Okay, thank you. Christian Wolmar, you're not really a politician in the classic sense, but you're going to do it anyway. Why are you?
Well, I've become a politician by virtue of being here. But yes,
Oh,
I'm not a career politician, and I think that's why I offer something completely different. And I think I fit into the mould of what the existing mayors have already been, by being somebody who's somewhat independent. I'm a Labour Party person, but somewhat independent from that. And of course, my field of expertise is transport. And what does the mayor mostly do? 2/3 of the mayor's budget goes on transport. And I've worked in transport for the last 20 years, written books and the likes. And also, I offer ideas. I mean, I've come into this for completely different reasons. I'm not kind of seeing this as my next job in a career in politics. I'm seeing this because I have ideas for London. And those I'll hopefully get a chance to talk about in the next hour or so, but you'll be able to see on my website, on the little card we've handed out, something different.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me turn to my panel now. Tony Travers, you've seen so many mayors here, well, the 2 elected mayors here, and you've studied mayors all over the world. Is this a job for a sane person?
It is. I mean, the 2 mayors we've had have both in their way converged on the idea of a city that's fast growing, and they've enjoyed and worked with the idea of that growth. And I think mayors of big cities don't want to be mayors of declining cities. But they've also become mayor at a time when the gap between the rich and the poor has grown for all sorts of different reasons, and when the transport, which is still a major priority, has to some extent been overtaken by housing as a priority, simply because of the growth in the population.
So what sort of person's good at the job?
I think you'd have to be able to make decisions, know what you're about to do, and crucially, find a way of working with the boroughs, who have a great deal of power and who in the end can stop or start very much more than the mayor on their own.
Okay, well, on such mayoralties stand or fall. As I mentioned, we've had questions sent in to us by the Changing London organisation. One of those questions is from Francis Clark, who I think is with us this evening. There, over in the corner there, she has the microphone. Can we have your question, please, Francis?
Changing London blog, David Christie said that 153 people were killed in road accidents in London in 2012, while an estimated 4,500 died from the effects of air pollution. A King's College study last week showed that this figure might be twice as high, with as many as 25 people a day killed by the effects of pollution. London is so far in breach of safety limits for some pollutants that we face paying hundreds of millions in fines to the EU over the next few years. Can I ask the candidates, what would you do about this? Would you, for instance, impose stricter limits for the London low emission zone and ensure that all taxis and buses use clean technology?
Okay, thank you very much, Francis. No flim-flam there. David Lammy.
The highest amount of pollution is actually at the school gate in the morning at 8:30, 9 o'clock, and then again in the afternoon at 3 and 3:30. We need to encourage parents to actually have their children walk to school. And if that means bringing back lollipop men and women so that kids feel safe, then we must do that. But we must also absolutely ensure that we have a strict ultra-emission zone, that we bring forward the date of that not to 2020, but a lot earlier. We also need to encourage cycling. We need to double the budget for cycling. We need someone on the board that actually understands cycling. And absolutely, we need to think very carefully about banning HGVs during peak hours. Pollution in London is killing many, many thousands. It's an urgent, urgent priority. We need a greener mayor and a whole host of other policies, including making our public buildings energy efficient and with solar energy, if we are actually going to make the city a lot healthier.
Sadiq Khan, 153 people killed in road accidents, 4,500 killed by the effects of air pollution. What are you going to do about it?
Well, actually, I think you're right, Francis. Air quality last year killed 10,000 Londoners. There are children in some parts of London whose lungs are underdeveloped. Doctors advise on some days that we shouldn't jog in London. That's the main reason why I've changed my mind and I'm against a third runway at Heathrow Airport. And the Supreme Court, by the way, has held last month, as you said, the air in London is unlawful. But that's not enough. We need to extend the ultra-low emission zone. That's not enough. We need to increase the TfL budget spent on cycles, segregated cycle highways. Simply painting the roads blue won't make our cyclists any safer. We need to return proficiency tests at school so children learn how to cycle their bikes. We need to extend mini Hollands all around London. Still not enough. The next time we procure buses, they need to be electric buses rather than the sham we have today from Boris Johnson. That's still not enough. We should pedestrianise Oxford Street and plant 2 million trees across London. We need to make sure London changes from being a city looking backwards to one looking forwards. A modern mayor of a modern London will make sure our city can breathe safe air, but also have a city where you can walk to work and not be run over, and cycle to work and not be run over.
Gareth Thomas.
Francis, the straight answer to your question is yes. I think we have to extend the congestion zone, as I made clear in my first answer. I think we have to refine it to make it based on emissions. And the additional revenues that are raised from doing that, I think we have to use to, if you'll forgive the pun, accelerate the switch to electric cars and electric buses, and indeed electric taxis or other forms of low-carbon public transport. But I also think we need, when we allow Heathrow to go ahead with a third runway, and I disagree with Sadiq's argument that air pollution will be significantly higher as a result of a third runway. It is surface transport to Heathrow which will be the significant problem, which is why I say we have to extend the congestion zone and encourage more people to use public transport, which is why cutting fares and making it more affordable to use the tube or the trains or the buses in London is so essential too. I do agree with David, we can do more to encourage solar panels, particularly community-run and cooperative solar panels. And I like the idea of a London urban park to encourage people to celebrate the green open spaces that we have in our city.
Okay, thank you very much. Tessa Jowell?
Well, I think this is one of the aspects of the crisis which is facing London, and I think that there are things that we need to do now, medium and long term. Let me just talk briefly about the long term and the nature of the city. in 2030, 2035. And at each stage, we need to take Londoners with us. There needs to be a shared understanding of the scale of this crisis and the degree to which our behaviour needs to change. I hope that by 2035, but I doubt even if I am elected as mayor, I'd still be mayor by then. But I think that by 2035, I would expect the centre of London to be car-free and the only vehicles to be electric vehicles. I think that a presumption that the cars that go into London are electric is something that we want to bring forward as fast as the technology will allow. I'd like to see done what we did during the Olympics, which was to stop daytime deliveries as a way of reducing congestion. But also extending the low emission zone and building a kind of garden right through the centre of London. So there's broad agreement, I think, about closing Oxford Street. Over time, I'd like to see that go further, Regent Street, through Piccadilly Circus, right through to Covent Garden. So that London becomes a walking city, London becomes a much greener city, but it's very difficult to implement this change unless there's a shared understanding about the scale of the risk. And we need to give Londoners the power and the means to monitor levels of air pollution. I would like to see monitors at buggy height around the city so that as mothers push or fathers push their babies around, they can monitor the scale of pollution and, in a sense, be persuaded by the case. The final point is that technology is always changing. So everything we do, whether it's in relation to electric buses or whatever, you must be able to retrofit the latest technology to keep pace with this.
Congratulations, you've already won, you've triggered the
There we
buzzer.
are.
You're the first person to trigger the buzzer this evening. Diane Abbott, would you see yourself as the Green Mayor?
You know, when Ken became mayor, he made transport absolutely the focus of his energies, particularly in that first term. And I think the incoming mayor has to make the environment and issues like air pollution the focus of their energy. But I also think we have to make ordinary people take ownership of this issue. This can't just be an issue for the people already informed. We have to inform everybody. I was involved in a really interesting project in Hackney on a council estate where they put solar panels up on Bannister House, and the tenants put their money together and invested in the solar panels, and now they get cut price heating and cut price water. And that's a sort of project which ordinary people can understand on our estates that I would roll out as mayor. I also think there should be a bigger and low emission zone. I believe in more electric buses. I would promote cycling, improve the transport infrastructure, particularly Crossrail 2, the Hackney to Chelsea line, so Chelsea people can come to Hackney. And I must say, I haven't changed my mind on the third runway. I have always been against the third runway, and you will find that is one of a number of issues tonight which I've been fractionally more consistent on than my colleagues.
Okay, thank you. Have you asked people in Hackney if they want all these people from Chelsea to come too?
Well,
You might want to check. Christian Wolmar.
Well, this is actually fascinating because I'm just going to be a bit cheeky here, because one of the reasons I came into this was to give Labour a green tinge. I thought that actually Labour had missed out on this. And some of the candidates privately said, gosh, we're so pleased you're here because you're giving an environmental edge. And over the course of the hustings over the last few weeks, it's been fascinating watching them kind of gradually move into my territory and say, right, pedestrianising Oxford Street. We'd never thought of that, but that's a great idea, something I've written about since 1998, actually. And we really have to have a bold and radical approach. And I understand that approach. And I think to some extent my colleagues here are camping in on it. And I think what one has to do is one has to have an approach that is entirely about sustainable London, livable London. And that's what all the ideas that I've developed over the last 3 years have been about. So yes, it does encompass pedestrianising Oxford Street, but it's not just about pedestrianising Oxford Street. It's about saying that we want a different sort of city, a different sort of urban realm in 2030, 2045, whatever, than we have at the moment. And we'll move away from the dependence on the car. It's a radical thing to do, but we've got to do it.
Okay, well, you're sounding quite mayoral, actually. I seem to remember Ken Livingstone used to say, if someone has a good idea, I nick it. Raphael Bear, you've heard what they've said about cutting road deaths and also air pollution. Are you convinced?
Well, it's amazing. I mean, there is this kind of consensus, it seems, you know, the problem is there are just far too many cars in London, and it's one of those things that I think probably most people would agree on, except they'd also agree that someone else's car is the problem. This is why I'm interested. I mean, as much as, obviously, here in The Guardian, you're going to get a lot of traction saying, you know, too many cars, pollution is a problem. To be mayor for the whole of London, you'd still need a political strategy to persuade someone that it's actually their car journey that needs to stop, and that actually when you're getting the kids out to school and they're running late, that really they can't get in the car and drive there. And that's why I was interested to hear those among the panellists who talked a little bit more about how do you build the consent for these kind of measures, because actually it's easy enough here to say let's do it. Suddenly when it's small businesses coming out saying, well, hang on, where are our customers going to park? Or when you talk about HGVs not delivering in peak hours, well, if they're trundling down the road in the middle of the night instead, or likewise deliveries. So that sense of building the consent for things that are easy to say on paper may be harder once people realise that they're going to have to compromise a bit on their lifestyle to deliver it. That's what I'm interested in.
Polly, are you convinced that the candidates here have this one covered?
Yeah, I think that all sounds quite good. I think it's interesting that they've all copied off Christian Wolmar.
There's no shame in that.
No shame in that. I think the idea of them all nicking each other's ideas is a very good thing, and it's a good reason for having these hustings, that whoever gets selected will actually cherry pick the best of what everybody else is saying. I'm quite interested, though, in the things that they think they can do beyond what the mayor's obvious powers are. How much influence you can have over things that are nominally not the mayor's powers, but nevertheless incredibly important. Things like tonight, 3 of them will be going off to vote on the benefit cap, which is going to have more effect on London and the South East than anybody else. You know, what kind of power can they bring to bear that's beyond their statutory power? What kind of influence? Who would have the stature to swing events like that?
Well, we will try and draw that from them later on, but thank you very much for that, Polly. Let's go to another question, and again, it's from Changing London, and it's from Paul Hocker. Is Paul with us?
Hi, can you hear me? Yes.
I can, but speak up a bit. So
okay, here I am. I'm Paul, I'm from the charity London Play. We're in the business of making better London childhoods, particularly for those children trapped in poverty. And my question is about the work that we've been doing since 2009 on play streets. That's closing residential streets for a couple of hours every week, every month, every fortnight, so children can play out, isolated adults can socialise, and people just generally feel good. So my question is, streets account for 80% of London's public space, and yet almost all of it is reserved for cars, while London's children are desperately short of play space. Would you, as Mayor, support an effort to achieve 10,000 play streets by the end of your term in office, working with people like us, London Play, and others?
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. And of course, I'm concerned that they will all steal your ideas, Christian, so you go first.
Yes, well, this is an idea that I've been putting about. I've spent the last 3 years going around Labour parties, going around NGOs, talking about ideas precisely such as this. And indeed, in my own street, we've actually got an attempt to try to block off the street at one end. And if you look at this in historic terms, streets used to be a place where people did lots of things. I actually old enough to play football in my local street, you know, and it didn't matter that the occasional car would come along. And I think we've got to restore that. We've got to restore the sense that actually streets are not just about thoroughfares. So my idea, 20 mile an hour default zone across London, having lots of cycle lanes, the sort of local cycle lanes, not necessarily these big cycle superhighways, but enabling kids to cycle to school. So gradually changing the nature of streets. And I'll start off by using the £30 million that Boris has allocated to the Garden Bridge, in scrapping the Garden Bridge and allocating it and allocating 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 to hundreds of streets across London to start this sort of work.
Thank you very much, Christian. Gareth Thomas, I'm sure you're going to start with a defence of the Garden Bridge.
I'm not, and I suspect you're not going to hear that from any one of the candidates, certainly not on the basis of what we've all said at previous hustings. I think the idea of 10,000 safer streets is a great one, and sir, I shall certainly steal your idea if I get selected as mayor. I think the question is how is it funded? And one of the challenges is that many of the communities in those streets would want to go to their local council for financial support. Councils are seriously financially strapped. So if the 30 million that Christian talks about in terms of the garden bridge isn't enough to help, if it's been used in other ways, we need to think about how we help councils to have more resources going forward. And that's one of the reasons why I think we should bring in a hotel occupancy tax, levy a tax on every tourist who comes to Britain, an extra charge which we can use to fund initiatives like this.
Thanks very much, Gareth. Tessa Jowell, a hotel tax. Have you ever heard of that before?
Yes, and you'll be amazed to hear that today I announced 10 things to do before you're 10.
With a hotel tax?
With a voluntary levy on hotels, plus some of the mayor's own funds. But I want to just take the question. I want London to be the best city in the world to grow up in. And what scars London is the scale of childhood inequality. And when 5-year-olds go to school in the autumn, 4 out of 10 will be unready for school. And I just want you all to understand the scale of inequality that is kind of established in a child's life at that point. That's why, we'll come on to Play Streets, I would return Sure Start. I was the architect of Sure Start with David Blunkett. It was intended as an early nurture programme to support the very early weeks and months of the relationship between mother and baby. That is essential for this kind of successful growing up. I would return Sure Start to its founding purpose, but I would also tackle the inequality of rich experience in London children.
Okay. And the
by
Play Streets before
developing
you run out of
10
time.
things to do before you're 10, and Play Streets will be part of that. Only one part, though.
Yeah, a mild sprinkling,
I
we'll
haven't
call
had
that,
the
I
bell
think.
yet.
David Lammy.
Stolen some time.
I have announced that I would certainly have 1,000 Play Streets in my first term. But let me just say a bit more. I believe in youth workers and youth services, and we've seen those drastically cut right across London. We need statutory youth services, and a mayor needs to do a lot to campaign for that, but also to bring youth services back where they've been cut. There will be many in this audience, baby boomers who had free education, periods of full employment, the ability to buy a home and a pension. We've got a younger generation. We're going back to Parliament. Their housing benefit withdrawn. EMAs withdrawn. Huge tuition fees and a terrible, terrible legacy for Londoners. So absolutely, we have to make growing up in London a priority. The next mayor has to fight quite a lot, and particularly on youth services, and cuts to FE budgets of 50% is something a mayor absolutely has to fight over this next period. So yes to 1,000 Play Streets, adventure play, particularly supporting youth workers, supporting teachers. But my God, the next agenda over the next 10 years is a pretty aggressive fight to stand up for young Londoners.
Sadiq Khan.
Paul, I mean, let me answer your question directly. I've met David Robinson and pinched the idea. I think it's a great one. When I was growing up, a couple of years after Christian, we used to play on the streets all the time. The lamppost on Langwood Road and Brenda Road was the wicket I'd bat in front of and practice cricket. And if you hit an edge and went to the fence, you're caught in the slips. If you hit a car, you're out. And I trialled with Surrey. And so it worries me, that road now, my mum still lives there. You can't be on the street for more than a minute before a car races past. The real issue is the bureaucracy with local authorities closing roads down. We can make it far easier. We saw with the big lunch how making it cheaper, making it easier can close roads off and provide a space for neighbours to meet neighbours. It's a social hub is what we need. Children from different backgrounds playing with each other, which doesn't happen often enough. And we had the big lunches. What you saw is neighbours who lived in the same road for 40 years talking for the first time with each other and breaking bread. So poverty is very important in the numerical sense, but also poverty of not mixing with your neighbours. Playing with each other and learning the life skills that brings are really, really important. two final things I say which is linked with this. I've already announced last week, but it's relevant to youth facilities, which David is so passionate about, because both David and I benefited from youth services when we were growing up, partly funded by the GLC, others by good local authorities. I'm going to sell off the water cannons, which cost £218,000, and give that to youth services around London. But also, I've got to say this, when you've got a situation where there is so few play spaces, the idea of selling off the green belt, like somebody else wants to do, is a bad idea.
I'm sure they'll discuss that later. And of course, the water cans won't help you because they don't work.
Well, we paid a $250,000 for them. There'll probably some other mug paid similar amount as well.
There's about 38 faults in them. I think that's more than one of my columns. Diane Abbott.
Just with reference to London being the best city in the world to be a child, if we're serious about that, we all should be committing ourselves to fighting these welfare cuts, and particularly the benefit cap, which will do more to harm children in London than almost anything else we're discussing tonight. But on Play Streets, we've got some great Play Street projects in Hackney, and I've been to see them, and I've been to the Play Street conference. And what's great about the Play Street idea, it actually doesn't cost much money. And it's not just that the children get to play out, the parents come and stand around and talk to each other, and it's a way of binding communities together. So I think they're a great, low-cost, innovative idea, which I would support as mayor. I'd only say one thing. It's really important when you're rolling out Play Streets that all of the children in the neighbourhood get involved, whether they're owner-occupiers, whether they're renters, or whether they're in the council estate. It's just that one thing which would help them bind communities together.
Okay, thank you, candidate. Can I talk to the panel now? Polly, you've heard that. Do you hear their manifesto for children in terms of where they can play and spaces they can play? And things that actually the mayor can actually do?
I think it is very important. I think life has changed a lot. I mean, I was brought up in London, and we were free to roam all over the place, and nobody worried where we were or where we went in a way that's absolutely unheard of now. And so I think that commitment really is important. I think looking at young Londoners and their futures, it looks pretty grim at the moment. I mean, as David mentioned and listed all the things that have gone and all the things that aren't there, I think that's really important, that they're the ones that have got forgotten. Everything's been loaded onto benefits for the old, and everything's been stripped away from the young. So I think that's a winning formula if they can stick with that.
Okay, thank you, Polly. As I said, there's a particular tone to our discussion tonight because, you know, we can talk about financial policy and what the mayor will do with the City of London and the political relationship with the boroughs and things like that. But I think because of our association with Changing London, we really want to talk about those quality of life things. So we're going to stick with children just for a moment. And can I ask Steve Moffat to show himself and ask his question?
Steve.
Hi, my name's Steve Moffat. I work for an organisation called A New Direction, which is about access and equality to arts and culture.
Can you all hear him? Just a bit louder, please, Steve.
Okay, I work for an organisation called A New Direction, and we're about access and equality to arts and culture. Sally Goldsworthy, the inspiring chief executive of the Discover Children's Story Centre in Stratford, died last month. In her contribution to Changing London, she suggested a cultural guarantee for every young Londoner by the time they'd left school. Sally spoke about every child seeing a play, visiting an art gallery, writing with an author, and being mentored by a professional artist. How would you ensure such a guarantee for all children in London?
Steve, thank you for that. And I can second what you said about Sally Goldsworthy. I knew she was an extraordinary woman. Sadiq Khan.
There's a great Oscar Wilde saying, it's one of my favourite, which is people know the price of everything but the value of nothing. And it goes with the arts, which is very, very important. My dad, bus driver, every spare weekend he had, we would jump on a bus and go to the museums in South Kent or go to the free art galleries. They were free before the Tory government charged them, before we got rid of them as well, one of our greatest achievements. But it's a quality of life issue. We have in Tooting Tara Arts, which has led to a new generation of world-leading actors coming through a local arts company. One of the things that they do is provide local school children the chance to go to a local theatre. I'm patron of Polka Theatre in Wimbledon, which I'm sure you've heard of, Steve. What we do in the Polka Theatre is organised for children from local state schools, the opportunity to experience going to the theatre, which is so crucial. The irony is this: Forget those from a council estate like David and I came from. You now have middle-class children whose parents can't afford to take them to the best theatre in the world in central London. Juliet Stevenson famously a couple of weeks ago said she can't afford to take her kids to the best theatre in the world. So there is a role for the mayor to play. Some of it's making sure that suburbs around London have thriving centres of art. Battersea Art Centre in my borough is a good example. We also need to engender cultural philanthropy. It happens in other countries where successful business people, successful Londoners, successful artists give something back. One of the things I will say before I end, Hugh, is one of the biggest issues when you speak to those who make films and theatre in London is the cost of housing. They can't get the artists to come to London because housing's so expensive. So it's all linked up with the quality of life issue. And as a mayor, quality of life is an important thing for me.
Christian Wolmar.
Yes, no, this is one where clearly one has to just agree with what you're saying, how important the arts is to young people. I've got very little to add on that. I mean, it's not something where, I think one can make great political statements and in agreement, but I don't think that any of us would disagree with the idea. Funding it is the other problem, but the mayor does have a big advantage, and that's where I really think we ought to emphasise, is that the mayor has this emblematic role of being able to steer things in a particular direction. And Boris has largely steered things in the wrong direction. And I think that's what we need to do, is steer things in the right direction, have a mayor who will do that.
Gareth Thomas, the cultural guarantee, is that a good idea?
I think something like it certainly is. At the risk of being provocative, I have a 6-month-old daughter. I wanted to grow up first as an Arsenal fan and a Welsh rugby fan, but I also want her to enjoy the arts. And first and foremost, it's about being able to get to the arts, to enjoy them. So it's one of the reasons why I'm committed to lower fares. But it's also about encouraging both talented young people in terms of art, being able to display their art and have confidence that they can show their art and have a career in the arts. And that's one of the reasons why I've said London should bid to be the European City of Culture. That bid should be based on Outer London. It's in Outer London in particular where cultural institutions are under most attack, are having most of their funding cut. And it should be about encouraging young Londoners too to be the next generation of artists and creative thinkers going forward. And why not have a competition as part of European City of Culture to host the best of young London's art in Buckingham Palace? That, I think, would be a better use of Buckingham Palace.
Could there be a worse one? Tessa Jowell.
Thanks, Steve. The easiest thing in the world is to say yes. Who would disagree with honouring Sally's memory in this way? And I was in touch with David last week about it. You see, I think culture plays a very special place in our city. It's one of the great sort of arenas of equality. The national, our galleries were constitutionally formed so that they belong to the people of London, not to the government. When I was in government, we introduced free entry to museums, we introduced creative partnerships, and the Cultural Festival of the Olympics gave 20 million people around the country their contact with culture. It's part of 10 things to do before you're 10, but beyond 10, that I'm working very hard with cultural institutions to develop. But also remember, there are creative industries as well. So this is not just feeding the soul, reminding us what it means to be human, but it's also a very important contribution to the future of our economy in London.
Thank you, Mike. David?
30 years ago, a young black Aled Jones, me, was singing in the church choir, and Ilya at that time funded my ability to go and be a cathedral chorister in Peterborough Cathedral. It was my Billy Elliot moment. So back then, Ilya and the old GLC understood the importance of the arts. We are seeing music education dismantled across London. We are seeing museums shutting down their educational units. And there is a real concentration of the arts in Zone 1, and Zone 4 and 5 are bereft, if you like, of artistic development. We're also seeing huge penthouses and wonderful housing going up and no culture and arts built in. New York City, certainly Manhattan, zones for the arts. And I think the next mayor of London, certainly I, would look at how we can zone to keep the arts in. If you go to St. Martin's, they're saying that artists are graduating and they're going to Berlin. We're in danger of losing the artistic temperament of this great city.
All right, thank you. Presumably you feel it's too late for you as a singer now.
No, I'm in the parliamentary choir, but I'm not going to sing now.
Look,
a bit like Barry White these days.
As long as we haven't given up. Polly, I heard a lot there about things that might happen. I didn't hear a guarantee.
You forgot Diana.
Oh, I'm sorry, Diane. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Tell us about your guarantee. I'm sure you're going to promise us a guarantee.
What I'm going to say is this. I think that fine art and high culture is really important. I used to drag my son along to museums when he was tiny on the bus. And amazingly, he still goes to museums of his own free will now. But I think it's also important that such a cultural guarantee should also encompass all communities' culture and art, their gospel choirs, going to see inside some of the most amazing temples and mosques we have in London. Because I think one of the key things you can do as Mayor of London is actually bind Londoners together. So I think such a cultural guarantee should be about more than the sort of standard high art and high culture. It should be about the arts and culture, which is blossoming around the corner from us in London if we but stepped into unfamiliar venues. I also think, again, we should work with all types of partners to get this offer in front of their young people. Whether it's some of those big churches in London which you see 3,000 people on a Sunday morning. That's the only way we'll get high art and culture to all our young people, working with the kind of partners people don't often think of in this context. So yes, art and culture is important, but everybody's art and culture is important in 21st century London.
Thank you very much for that. I wonder if you can guess who I'm going to ask first next time. Polly, as I said, there was no guarantee there, though, was there? Isn't that one of the difficulties about the mayoralty, in that everyone wants something from it, but mayors can't necessarily guarantee things and they haven't got the money anyway?
No, there wasn't a cast-iron guarantee, which would be nice to see, but you'd have to say where the money came from. Also, I'm slightly surprised they didn't talk a bit more about how the arts are the powerhouse of so much of London life and of so much of London economy. So much else depends upon it too. So getting young people, getting children involved in it is part of the economy and the energy of London too. And I'm a little bit surprised that they didn't talk more about the whole ecology of the arts. Well,
Raphael?
Yeah, I thought we started to touch on something really interesting there, because there's already been some discussion about inequality, and this is the theme that's obviously going to come up again and again, because London, the inequality is so obviously, it's in our faces all the time, and yet it's obviously about more than just income distribution. That's absolutely pivotal to it. But there is this strange paradox about London, isn't it, that it's so mixed and so diverse, and yet also discreetly very segregated in all sorts of ways. And the arts really gets you into this sense that actually are people, obviously there's this question of financial access, opportunity, also the sense that some cultural artistic institutions don't seem to give people permission to come in. Does this actually belong to all Londoners? And so I'm kind of really hoping we'll start to get into that sense of what is it about the nature of inequality in our capital that actually means that some people feel excluded from things, that takes the inequality debate a little bit further on from just who's got more money in their pocket.
Thank you for that. We're going to just have one more question on children. The future of London, and it's from Joe Robinson. Joe with us? No, we are. Oh no, here we are.
I'm going to ask, how will you involve children and young people in the decision making about London and its future? So, for example, would you consider something that Changing London has come up with, which is establishing a young mayor with the proper support and the responsibilities for ensuring that the voices of young people are heard at the heart of City Hall?
One that we can probably answer pretty quickly. Diane?
We know that a lot of London boroughs have done very well with their young mayors, and I think we should have a young mayor in London, but I also think it would be good to have a young assembly, building on the work of all the youth parliaments across London. Because what we've had, most recently, the youth parliaments were able to come, against the resistance of some members of Parliament, they were able to come and speak in Parliament, and have a debate in Parliament. And actually, I think the quality of the debate was a lot higher than you usually have in Parliament. So I would have a young mayor and a young assembly in London.
Gareth?
I think it's a great idea. I think the Youth Parliament has worked well, certainly in my area, in encouraging young people to both make a contribution to the big decisions that are made locally by the council, and also in holding me and other politicians to account at a local level. So I certainly think we should try to replicate it at mayoral level. I also think we have to actually look beyond more accountability from the younger generation and actually say that Londoners as a whole should have more accountability over the decisions that are taken in their borough, in their city. So I'd like to see more powers devolved to the mayor and the Assembly away from Westminster and Whitehall. So that, for example, we can shape the big decisions about the future of our housing market in London, we can tackle child inequality, and we can debate the issues about more investment in public transport ourselves, without always having to go cap in hand to the man in Whitehall or the men in Westminster.
Christian, you're fairly young, but do you think you'd be aided by someone younger than you?
Yes, I'm slightly sceptical about this, and I'll tell you why. I think the biggest issue about our democracy, actually, is why young people do not vote. We would have a completely different complexion to the general election result because the over 60s voted Conservative and the under 50s basically voted Labour, but they let few of them vote. And so I'm not entirely sure that this sort of slightly token idea is where I'd like to go. I think we have to have a much more concerted attempt to engage young people in community activity, in politics. I think it's actually partly down to the political parties to do that, to actually have proper youth wings, as it were, kind of feeding into the party, giving them genuine kind of power over the issues, rather than kind of imposing some sort of pretend kind of parliament which really doesn't have much meaning. So I think I'd like to see them get engaged in real issues.
David Lammy, does it have to be a token idea?
It doesn't have to be, but I think that we have to set up a mandatory mechanism where young people actually get to audit the GLA budgets. We've had after-school clubs cut. We've had breakfast clubs cut. We've had mentors cut. This has all been done quietly because in the end, young people don't have the vote. So a mayor of London campaigns to give young people the vote at 16, but he also gives them an absolute mechanism to hold him and the GLA to account. Well, you can build that in. I think you've got to do that. I think you've got to do that. And seriously, we've now got a spike in knife crime, and that is partly because the organisations, that not just the punitive ones, not just the enforcement by the police, but the actual grassroots organisations that support young people to stay away from knives, to stay away from gangs, their budgets also are being cut. So it only works if you give youth councils, mayors, an actual ability to audit the budget.
Sadiq Khan, do you like that idea? Do you want to steal that? There's a lot of stealing going on.
Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, it's a good idea. I mean, just to answer Joe's question, I think actually it's not too difficult to get young Londoners involved if you've got a good progressive mayor. My concern is it'll be the people you expect, it'll be the middle-class kids getting involved in running for the young mayor of London and the Youth Assembly. Nothing against that. I'm really passionate about getting involved with the young people in the council estates where I grew up. When I go there now, I mean, the quality of citizenship education in our schools, the lack of aspiration frightens me. And I've been doing some work with Dare to Dream, hashtag Dare to Dream, about using different platforms to get young people involved in my policies. Because they're not going to come to a youth centre, not all of them. They're all going to come to City Hall. How do we go to young people and get them involved in relation to decision making is really, really important. And one of the things we need to think about is the fact that in a modern city, you need a mayor that's going to have not just empathy and have walked in their shoes, but can relate to them and listen. Because one of the biggest complaints we have as MPs in London is young people thinking that we're out of touch. We don't care. We don't understand their issues. I'll give you one example. I'm all in favour of every single police officer in the Met Police having a camera on their uniform, especially when it comes to stop and search issues. Why don't we ask young Londoners what they think about this, get them involved in some of these decisions? David's alluded to auditing budgets. What about having a percentage of the budget where they can decide how to spend it on? A participatory budget, like other cities around the world have. Some mayors have a big air, I forget which city it was, a big air outside the city hall to show they're listening to citizens of their city. We've got to change the relationship young Londoners have from being consumers to being citizens and being active citizens. And my vision as Mayor of London is to transform London together with all citizens, including young ones as well.
Tessa, we're in a bit of a bidding war. We've gone from them being a young mayor to having the mayor auditing the budget. What would you offer?
Well, I think it's actually more difficult than that. I think it's very easy to say, yes, let's have a young mayor. I would certainly have a young mayor. I would create all these, kind of open structures. But the purpose of this is to make you feel uncomfortable and to challenge all the kind of orthodoxies. And, for instance, I'm listening to the point that Sadiq's just made. I've been working for the last 6 months with Doreen Lawrence on Stop and Search with a large group of young people for whom Stop and Search is part of their everyday lives. And, we came up with a much better set of recommendations because of that than I suspect any of this panel in their collective wisdom could have come up with. So I think, what you need if you're Mayor of London is you need to have lots of disruptors, and people who are challenged are going to challenge you, not just young people who fit a box, fit a category that you're going to tick a box and say, well, we've included all of them. So I would build this in to every single bit of what I did. And you've also got to spend a lot of time with young people, have them alongside you. We always had work experience. Kids from my local schools in my constituency in the office, and we learnt so much from them. We gave to them, but we also learnt a lot from them. So it's this disruptive power, this irreverence of young people that need to challenge people like all of us.
Well, just to get you used to that, we have our own panel of disruptors here. We'll do that for you. Tony Travers. People talk about youth mayors. Is there, a lot about the way City Hall works, the constitution of it. Is there actually a place for them? Can it work?
I think doing this kind of thing across the whole of London would be pretty difficult. I mean, it's a city of 8.5 million people, and trying to get even, how many people could realistically be involved at that level? I think the boroughs could be assisted in doing a great deal more. But the other thing that it occurs to me in listening to the debate is that, in a sense, people get involved in, you don't need to say this to politicians, people get involved in things, young people get involved in things where they feel passionately about them. And so I think the issue will be to find the issues that people really feel about, and I'm sure Stop and Search is one of them, by the way, and then go for those issues, and then think, what's the way of cracking that? And it might not be at the London-wide level, occasionally it might, but then at whichever level it can be most appropriately handled. But I definitely go for issues like pollution, like Stop and Search, without being patronising, which would really galvanise people's interests.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's go. You mentioned things that people are really passionate about. Let's go to one of those. Another question, slight change of gear. Is Claire Jeffrey with us? Yeah, at the back. They all seem to be at the back.
Hi there. I'd like
Speak up
to...
if you can, Claire.
Sure. I'd like to ask you this evening about London's big businesses, and in particular their executives. And I wanted to hear from each of you whether, in your personal view, top pay is too high in London, and if you do, what you plan to do about it.
Thank you, Claire. There's a two-pronged question there, and I'd like you to answer both bits within your minute. Is it too high? But more importantly, because you want the job, what would you do about it, Diane Abbott?
One of the things I've seen in my lifetime is the multiple between the lowest paid person in a big business and the highest paid person in a big business has gone from, 13 times to 44 times. There's been a huge widening of the gap. I think at the bottom end, as London Mayor, I would roll out a London living wage, not just to the people that I employ directly, the people that the fire brigade and the police employ, but also try and set an example to borough councils and to the rest of the private sector. But at the top end, I would be arguing, and you, as the mayor, you can do something about a London living wage, but in terms of the very high earnings at the top of the salary scale, it's something you have to campaign for. But it's all part of the issue of inequality in London, and it's all one of the issues, speaking out against that inequality, trying to shame companies that pay those huge sums to top executives. It's a key role for the mayor, I think.
Tessa Jowell, I think it was a Labour figure once said that you were comfortable with the rich. As mayor, would you be comfortable with the rich in London?
Well, I'm comfortable with people being rich if they act as citizens of London and not if they buy flats here simply as if they were gold bars that they would otherwise leave in the bank. No, I'm not comfortable with that kind of wealth. But yes, I want London to be a city where people can make money, where they can be successful. But I think there is also another thing, which is, there's agreement among all of us about the importance of the London living wage. I'm a trained community organiser with London Citizens. I work with them a lot. I've campaigned with them on the living wage for a long time. I would also seek powers to get a London minimum wage because the national minimum wage doesn't recognise the additional costs of London. But you see, I think you're right. I think in 10 years' time, for a ratio between the highest paid and the lowest paid not to exist is going to seem very odd indeed, because I think that in London, and I'm sure this is more general, but I like the idea of citizen businesses which are successful but also contribute to the people who are their customer base, but also contribute and pay back to their workforce. And the interesting thing is that those businesses that do apply this ratio show the greatest resilience in times of economic shock. So the argument is that this isn't just doing good, this is good commercial sense as well. And I think that, I'm trying to remember the name of the woman who last week, she's running a FTSE 100, and she has said that she will set a fixed ratio between her pay at the top and the pay of the person at the bottom. So yes, this is the idea that's coming.
Gareth Thomas, is top pay in London too high?
On occasion, you can't be comfortable with the level of senior executive pay. I think I'm the only candidate on this platform suggesting that London should have the ability to vary the rate of income tax. The same power as exists in Scotland, I think Londoners should have. I think there should be a referendum in September 2016 to debate across the whole of the capital whether London should have not only the ability to vary the rate of income tax, but also control of the National Health Service, control of the housing market in London, so that if we want to, as others have alluded to, we can introduce a cap on rents. So too, that we could introduce a London minimum wage set at living wage levels. These are powers that London doesn't have at the moment. We should have those powers to do something in each of those areas. And a referendum is the key to win consent from London for the Mayor and the Assembly to have those powers going forward.
Christian Wolmar.
This is one of those issues where one does wish that the mayor had more powers, but doesn't. Yes, of course, big business pays a lot of its top executives far too much money. It's not necessarily even linked to the proper performance of the company. So there is no doubt about that. One of the things that I've put up an idea that I think a mayor could do is from all the companies that supply the City Hall, they could demand that the company discloses its ratio, discloses how much the top people get and how much the lowest paid get. And one could also enforce a living wage, a genuine living wage, not the Tory version, but a genuine living wage on those companies. So you could do those two things, kind of insist on a disclosure and also insist that they have a living wage. And you could also try to use the mayor's role to encourage other companies to fulfil those obligations as well.
Okay, David Lammy.
Well, Christian's right. The mayor doesn't have those powers, effectively, and Tessa's right that we should definitely have a London minimum wage. But the mayor has a bully pulpit. When I announced back in September that I was running, I also decided that I was going to pick a particular sector and press for change. And that sector was largely because, of course, I've got the best football club in the Premiership in my constituency.
Certainly not.
Move on, move along.
But Spurs, along with all the other... Arsenal fan. That is absolutely an Arsenal fan, along with all the other Premiership clubs, were not paying their groundsmen, their caterers, their security guards, the London living wage. And along with London citizens, many of us press, they are now at least paying their direct staff the London living wage. So a mayor can campaign. We want to see more companies like John Lewis with profit sharing, because where there's profit sharing, as we see right across Germany, you get far less differential. Yes, of course, we want growth, and yes, of course, we want big business. But more than anything, after the crash in 2008, where young people are paying the tab, we want responsible business. And the next mayor of London has to do more to campaign for responsible business.
Sadiq Khan, you've seen what happens. Leave football out of it completely. Is top pay in London too high?
Well, I think that we've got to remember the mayor can do things by power or by persuasion, and sometimes both if he or she has the political will to do so. George Osborne has now set a precedent where he decides what the minimum wage should be rather than the low pay unit. He said minimum wage this year £6.70, next year £7.15, by 2020 £9. The living wage today in London is £9.15. So I'm going to argue for the mayor to have the power to set a London living wage, and I think it should be £10 an hour. And you know what? Businesses in London agree with me. It's more than 650 pay the London living wage as it is now. And do you know why? Because it improves productivity. It's easier recruiting staff and retaining staff. But also I'm going to link the rent people pay in new developments by introducing what's called a London living rent, linked to 1/3 of your earnings rather than the market value of people's rent. But the other thing I want to do is, we've currently got a TfL head leaving, Peter Hendy. He currently earns, roughly speaking, £650,000. The next guy, the next woman, shouldn't earn that much. Where we've got the power to reduce the remuneration of the top person, we should reduce it. And I'll also work with businesses in London, like the mayor of New York's done, Bill de Blasio, saying to the businesses in New York, train our youngsters for the jobs of tomorrow. Like Ram Manuel's done in Chicago, let's have an infrastructure bank to invest in our city. Like in Berlin and Stuttgart, where you have in the remuneration boards those who earn the least working in partnership. You know, business is very important to London. I want to be the most pro-business mayor ever, but also I want to be a living wage mayor as well. We can do both.
Polly, I want to ask you if that convinced you, if you see someone here who can cut excessive pay in London. But first, I want to quickly just ask Tony, the things you've heard, are these actually things that the mayor can do? Because often mayoral candidates, I won't name names, will say that they'll do things and actually don't have the powers to do them.
I think this is classically one where the mayor can't yet do anything. I mean, in a different world, and Gareth Thomas referred to this, it would be possible, and Christian mentioned it as well, with more power, it would be possible to affect the kind of changes that indeed Bill de Blasio has introduced, not that popularly, but I mean, you know, they are visibly different in New York, and the mayor of New York does have more power, and it, you know, in the end, New York is as successful today, or more so than ever it has been. So, but it would require a different world. Otherwise, we're left with the mayor of London, in the end, just being able to make a case to national government to change things, because in the end, with Polly's the expert on all of this, it's very hard for a sub-national leader, until Scotland gets its new position, very difficult for anybody outside Whitehall and Westminster to change these things.
Let me ask you something. Gareth was the only one who mentioned taking on extra powers, having a referendum for them, setting an income tax rate, really quite a step forward. Is that realistic?
Well, certainly the Scots are about to be given such powers. The Scots will have the power to do that. And of course, Scotland is, in economic terms, much smaller than London. And in New York, the mayor, as I mentioned, does have the power, not completely, but the margin to vary income tax levels. So it can be done elsewhere. It soon will be done elsewhere in the UK. It has been done in cities that are comparable with London. But of course, London's position is, in terms of this income difference, very different because of the substantial number of very high earners. And then the question would be, should the money stay in London? If the mayor set it, you'd have to make sure that the mayor, because that's what the mayor would want to do, with the money to stay in London. Because as we saw in the debate about the mansion tax during the general election, other parts of the UK might think the money was somehow theirs.
What I find extraordinary about this is every single contribution we managed to have without anyone mentioning the words financial services industry and the City of London. I mean, it's a peculiar omission. I mean, this is obviously such a fundamental part of what makes London a global city, why you have these extraordinary high levels of pay. And ultimately, like it or not, the Mayor of London is caught between a kind of international global advocacy role on behalf of the city and having to mediate between the city and the rest of the country that, for various reasons, some of them quite good, have come to despise the financial services industry. And it's sort of quite easy to say, I mean, a lot of those answers were about low pay, because it's sort of easier to say, well, we can, and the Chancellor has set this very strong precedent, we can mandate and enforce low pay. Actually, when you're there and you're in that office and you're, having to fend off the pressure from the city to say, well, you work for us, we don't work for you, I'd be interested to see which mayoral candidate would have the courage or the imagination to stand up on that.
David mentioned the bully pulpit. I mean, how much can a Labour mayor dare to bully the City of London?
Well, I mean, or should you want to? I mean, bear in mind, actually, the City of London is actually an enormously lucrative part of this country and what we do. I mean, that's why I'm fascinated by this suggestion, which I think is plausible. David really wants to get in here, and he's not trying to sing We're Walking in the Air, even though he was the Alan Jones of his day. I know, broadly speaking, if there is a cultural trajectory that we're on where it becomes intolerable to have these ratios too far, and I think it's possible, as I think Diane and Tessa both said, that we might be moving in that direction, I very much hope that's true, and that would be more desirable than a kind of mandatory high pay commission coming in and telling people what to do. I want a little bit more evidence that that's actually happening.
I want you to fold what you want to say into your next answer. I want to take another question, and I'm going to actually have you answer it very, very quickly. It's something very specific about something the Mayor might do. Will Horwitz, please.
Thank you very much. So we've touched a bit on the role of some of London's biggest businesses already, but the very specific suggestion is, would you, as a sign both of your commitment to the importance of business, but also your willingness to hold them to account where they don't meet the standards that we expect, would you be willing to buy a share in some of London's bigger businesses and then use that to turn up at their AGM and hold them to account there? And can I just slip in another question, which just directly relates to what Raphael just said? Mayors around the world have campaigned for financial transaction taxes, or the Robin Hood tax, it's sometimes called. What would your view be on campaigning for that?
All right, as I said, very clipped if I can, even less than a minute. And David, first.
Let me just say, I absolutely believe in a transaction tax, and I have previously bought shares in a company and gone to the AGM and pushed them to pay their staff more, and that was my local football club. But let me just say also in relation to the point that was made before, let me just make in relation to the point that was made, there is a lot of dirty money in London, and the next Mayor of London needs to campaign against it. It's propping up the housing market and overinflating the housing market with foreigners washing money through London and making it harder for ordinary London. So it's not just the financial services and wages at the top. Absolutely the next mayor needs to campaign for bigger transparency and more about that drug money and dirty money that's coming through. And let me just say this also. It is unacceptable for Google to have £17 billion worth of revenue in this city and only pay £11 million tax. It's unacceptable for Uber to be running cars in this city and pay no tax. The next mayor needs to campaign against that as well.
I think there's energy there to power a few Uber cabs. Tessa.
Well, that's why I don't have an Uber account, because, and I will get an Uber account when they pay their taxes. in this country. And this is the point that I was making, that businesses, whether they're the City of London or transnational corporations, have got to be citizens of our city. And part of being a citizen of our city is being engaged with the local community, being transparent, and paying your taxes. And, I think that we have enormous power as a city to demand that standard of decency. And it does mean taking on the wind of change in the City of London and forcing more transparency and more accountability and more engagement with London. And if you begin to open the doors and have young people going in doing work experience, and you have people running these companies mentoring young Londoners who are kind of on the outside or on the margin, you then begin to get a sense of change, and you have a sense of this being one city. But David is right. Where you have, for instance, Russian money leaving Russia in breach of sanctions, being deposited by anonymous purchases in properties in this city, that is a kind of corruption and a scar on our city. And if I were mayor, I would campaign against that. And I would use every single bit of convening power I had to get HMRC to change the rules.
Diane Abbott, you'd run the Met. Would you go after the dirty money too? And would you buy shares to allow you to exert some influence?
I am not going to seek to out-left Tessa Jowell. But I'll say this. Ken Livingstone actually worked very effectively with the city, which people didn't expect. And he worked with them by identifying what things they had in common. The city wanted investment in infrastructure. The city wants something done about housing. The London Chamber of Commerce is a strong advocate for better policies on housing and feels that Boris has failed. But I'd also say this. I've worked with the city at a grassroots level. Tessa said that she'd worked on Stop and Search for 6 months. I have to say, I've worked on Stop and Search all my political career. And as part of working on, really, because if you live in an area like Hackney, and if you've got the friends and family, and I have, the fear that any day, any evening, your son could be picked up by the police is a real one. It's not a 6 months project, it's a lifetime's anxiety. And one of the things I did as part of that was set up a project about education and urban young people. And it's gone on for nearly 20 years. David has spoken at my conferences. The other David spoke at my conferences. And I worked with city firms like UBS and Linklaters and Credit Suisse. So I've had the experience working with people, not telling them what to do, but saying, look, here's an issue, and this is something you can make a difference with. And that's what I try and do as mayor. Not 6 month projects, but taking people's lived experience, taking it to the city, and getting the city to do the thing we know they can do.
Believe me, this is all good practice for City Hall. It's just like, it's even worse in the chamber at City Hall. Sadiq Khan.
Look, corporate social responsibility is not simply a box you tick. It should be a mainstream issue you do. And clearly, look, the government needs to change legislation and invest more in enforcement. You've got to remember, as Christian keeps reminding us, the powers that the mayor has accepted, that he or she has a huge power to persuade. I'll give you examples where the mayor can do stuff. So the New Area estate, which Diane knows very well in Hackney, an estate bought by multinational in New York, and they wanted to move out from the estate those social housing tenants and then sell it off for private accommodation. Boris Johnson did nothing about it as the mayor of London. The mayor of New York said, I am embarrassed, shocked, and it's a badge of disgrace that an American company is doing this to Londoners. The company pulled out, and it's now, the families are still living there because of the steps taken by the mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio. The mayor of Stuttgart, what he has done is working with 150 businesses in Stuttgart, made sure young people have the apprenticeship to get the jobs in Stuttgart. Both Porsche and Mercedes in Stuttgart, a mayor who believes in partnership rather than simply being fodder for them to walk all over, win-win all round. But the real issue is this, Will. We need to diversify London's economy. Finance is all well and good, but we need to get more tech jobs here, more fintech, more creative industries, more low carbon, more manufacturing jobs. And what I will do as Mayor of London is argue for those jobs, both within this country, but make sure companies in Delhi, companies in Mumbai, the 20 fastest growing cities in the world in China. The businesses in America come and invest in London. And the one way you do this, by the way, is having a mayor who's pro-Europe. The potential Tory candidate, Zach Goldsmith, is anti-Europe. One of the things I'll do, should I be selected, is campaign on the side of Londoners, including businesses, to make sure we stay part of the European Union.
Thank you very much. Question, Wolmar.
Gosh, it sure shows it's a Guardian audience, because some of the things that are being said by the candidates would probably not be said in more moderate audiences. And I'm not going to try.
We're not moderate.
I'm not going to try and out-left them either. But of course, one should ensure that businesses are more brought to account. And of course, I like the idea of a Robin Hood tax, which some of the other candidates haven't mentioned. I'm sure they all support it. But I do think that one of the issues we haven't raised here is the City of London Corporation, which is this bizarre private, semi-private organisation in the middle of London, which doesn't really have proper democratic accountability. And in the old days, when the Labour Party was the Labour Party, there used to be a policy to try to incorporate the city into London. I would like to see that be done. I did go and see Mark Boliat, who runs the city, the other day. He said, oh, no, you really don't want to do that. And then he started talking to me about the £250 million that he's able to spend really pretty much as he wants to do, the profit from the Bridges fund and stuff. And I think that's something that we could really kind of find a little pot of money and go for it. It won't be necessarily popular with everybody in the city, but it's something we ought to do.
Okay. One word answer. When they have their fancy dinners at the Guildhall, does that mean you wouldn't go?
I won't wear a suit to go.
Oh, you go then. Okay. Gareth Thomas.
Will, just to come back to your question about would I buy shares and turn up at a big AGM, to be honest with you, the shares that I'm interested in, coming from the co-op tradition in the Labour movement, are community shares. I want to see a big expansion in community energy. People coming together to buy, to set up their own solar energy organisations, generating energy themselves, getting a return for themselves, that money staying in communities instead of ending up in the pockets of the big six energy firms. But I do like the work of an organisation called Share Action, who are a great campaigning body who do turn up to a whole range of AGMs and demand more transparency. And I think transparency has got to be at the heart of a new relationship between Londoners and the City of London. I think our ambition for the city is that it should become the most trusted financial centre in the world. Now, in order to do that, because that's in the interests of the city itself, but it's also in the interests of Londoners. It would mean that more wealth and more jobs were created in London. But at the heart of becoming the most trusted financial centre in the world, there has to be a better relationship with Londoners. And at the heart of that, there has to be more transparency about how much investment the financial services community helped to deliver into social and affordable housing, into low carbon development, into public transport. If we could get that level of transparency, and sure, there needs to continue to be some tough love towards the city on a day-to-day basis. Personally, I think the mayor should sit on the Prudential Regulation Authority so that regulators hear directly from the people about the need for that tough love going forward. But it is more transparency in the end that has got to be at the heart of a new relationship between the financial services in the City of London and the people of London themselves.
Okay, thank you very much. Of course, one of your jobs will be to keep London safe. Let's take a question on that. Is Jessie here?
Thank you. 31% of women aged between 18 and 24 report receiving unwanted sexual attention on London transport, and 41% have experienced it in public places. What would you do to address sexism and sexual violence against women and girls in London?
Vital question. You would have stewardship of the Met, so you will be able to set that policy. Sadiq Khan.
Well, I mean, this is an issue that concerns me, not simply because I want to be the Mayor of London, but I've got two daughters, aged 15 and 14, who I encourage to use public transport. It's really important that they do so, but feel safe to do so. So a number of things I'll do. The recommendations made as a consequence of the recent inquiry, I will make sure that this is a priority for the Met Police in relation to taking this issue seriously. The War Boys inquiry, which was in South London, affected some of my constituents in relation to their experience when they made a complaint to the police. I think there are issues about how the police are investigated. I also think, actually, one of the things that we've got to recognise is one of the things that make people feel safe using our tubes is having staff present. So I will review on day one this Mayor's plans to close all ticket offices in London, because I think having staff presence in London is very important. I also think we've got to make sure that we've got 8.5 million Londoners who could be the eyes and ears for the police. We as citizens, you understand, we've got a responsibility and a duty. If we see somebody who looks like they're uncomfortable in a tube station or in a carriage in a train, we act responsibly and see if we can go to help. We shouldn't have a situation where teenage children, young women or old women, feel harassed by, they tend to be men, and we're just standing by looking the other way. And I think there's a role for us to be active citizens here, and I think as the Mayor of London, we can change behaviour by leading by example. And this is a really important issue, and the Met Police, if it's anything when I'm Mayor, will be a Met Police on the side of Londoners, including women.
Do you think it isn't now?
No, I think there's a real perception, Hugh, about the Met Police being a police force rather than a police service. There's a real perception if you're a young black Londoner, a young Asian Londoner, they're not on your side. There's a perception if you're the victim of this unwarranted sexual attention, that when you report it, it's not taken seriously. There are fewer and fewer ways to see a police officer report a crime. You've got to do it by the internet or by the phone. And if we believe in policing by consent, we need Londoners to be on the police's side, and vice versa.
What would you have them do about this specific problem? But also, are you happy with the Met? I'm reminded that when Boris came into office, the first thing he did was change the leadership of the Met. Are you happy with the leadership of the Met?
I think there's a lot that we need to change in the Met. We're a long way from a metropolitan police that represents and looks like London. A long, long way. And the next mayor has to set targets and they have to be met. When you meet officers, so many of them don't actually come from the city, black or white. I think that's a real challenge. But on this question of everyday sexism, which is very, very real, we are living through times, and I see this in my own constituency, where there are many parents, they are not making a living wage, and like my own mother, they have to work 2 or 3 jobs to make a living wage. There's a generation of young Londoners raising themselves, an older sibling, latchkey kids, and unfortunately there are huge dangers now in the home with the internet and the sexualisation of our young people. So rather than all these posters up on the underground of Boris, actually there's a lot of public education we need in this city to protect our children. Rape is up, sexual offences is up, domestic violence is up in this city. There's a lot of rhetoric about crime falling, but certain crimes are rising. That's why I raised this at Prime Minister's questions on the last opportunity. So I think we need a Met that reflects the city. I think we need to bring back accountability with the MPA. I think we need far more public education. We're seeing it in areas like knife crime and gang violence, but I'm afraid we're also seeing it with a huge sexualisation that means not just assaults against women, but actually assaults against men are an issue in this city and this town.
Thank you. Tessa Jowell, what would you be saying to the Commissioner about this and about the leadership of the force?
Well, I think there are 2 things, and David's touched on it already. Only 15% of the Met are from black and minority ethnic, completely disparate with the proportion of Londoners who are from black or minority ethnic communities. So we have to have a police force that looks like Londoners in order to have confidence. The second is more women at every level in the Met. The question specifically, Jessie's question specifically, about the underground network. I mean, I would say to TfL, you're not going to have, posters asking people on the tube whether their bodies are beach ready, and all these other, kind of posters that are on the tube all the time. But the point is, Policing is one part of this, and it is absolutely the case that the Met has had a culture of acquiescence in the past, and Harriet and I, after Operation Sapphire revealed how lightly and how women were dissuaded from reporting rape, we got some changes. And, you know, it's more complicated when you see the incidence of rape rise, because in some cases it means that more women are coming forward and they're reporting rape and sexual attack, and we want that. But I think this kind of interconnection of women feeling safe comes from culture. It comes from young girls growing up with a very clear sense of what they shouldn't expect people to do to them. And it also means tackling a culture of kind of ambient sexuality, which preys on young women and undermines their sense of self-image and confidence. But then you want this to be policed by a Met that accepts and understands all that has it in its culture. And I'm not sure that we're yet at that stage, but I know that the work we did on Operation Sapphire, right to the highest level in the Met, sent shockwaves through their lackadaisical and negligent attitude to women who'd suffered sexual violence.
Gareth Thomas, you heard that reaction. Obviously a big issue for the Mayor. What would you do?
Well, I think, we talked about policing, but actually one of the things we need to change is the culture within the Crown Prosecution Service in terms of their willingness to prosecute people accused of domestic violence. I think it's a good thing that the Met are now wearing cameras, not only because it enables people to check whether people are being treated with respect out on the streets or not by police officers, but it also makes it easier for the police to gather evidence if there's been domestic violence accusations levelled in the home, so that those police and CPS can take people to court much more quickly. But I think there's a broader question about safety in London. We've seen about 4,000 police officers lost over the last 5 years. And the Metropolitan Police are currently expecting another 5,000 to 10,000 police officers to go over the course of the next spending review. Such are the cuts that George Osborne has planned for London. One of the reasons why I am so clear that Londoners should have the power to vary the rate of income tax, why we should have control of our own property taxes, is because we didn't vote for austerity here in London. And we need the powers, if we want to put more money back into the crucial public services like the police going forward. We have to win consent for that, which is why a referendum early on in the next mayor's term is so important for that. But if we want to keep our capital city safe, if we want the streets that our young people are walking on to be safe, we have to have the police. We're not going to have that under George Osborne, so the next mayor does have to contemplate putting up tax, if necessary, to invest in the police.
Okay, thank you. Diane Abbott.
The police. At the most senior level, the leadership of the Metropolitan Police is more informed, more understanding, more open than I've ever known it. Sadly, if you go down the ranks to medium levels and the bottom level, things aren't so good. One of the things I've done as an MP, not just for the past 6 months, but for many years now, is had a series of meetings in the House of Commons, because I think it's great to get young people and communities into the House on issues like the shooting of Mark Duggan, stop and search, what's happening in detention centres, and we had a big meeting after 2011 riots. And one of the things I would do as mayor is not so much tell the police what I think of them, but get them together with young people to understand what they think of them. In terms of staffing is a huge issue. If you're going to have all night use, you're certainly going to need, if anything, higher levels of staff in the night time. And just finally, I made a speech 2 years ago, and it was about the sexualization of the culture. We have seen a pornification of our culture. The average age at which a young boy views hardcore pornography now has dropped to 8. And the pornification of the culture actually creates the climate where some of these assaults happen.
Mr. Wolmar.
There's two aspects to Jessie's question, policing and transport. Let me deal with policing first. I've long had the idea that the Met is too big. It's dysfunctional. I've talked to senior people in the Met and they agree with me. It needs to be broken up. And I would like to see a police force totally dedicated to London, separated out of the Met, some of its national functions, particularly terrorism, but some of its others, given to a national police force. I think that would make it much more accountable and much more able to deal with the sort of issues that Jessie is talking about. I spent a day with the police in Islington a few months ago, and actually at the local level I was very impressed with the police, but they actually regretted greatly the fact that there was no longer community policing. And I think that even with a diminished police force, that's something that ought to be brought back. In terms of the transport aspect, we need the national rail services across London. It is them that are the major problem. The national rail service to be brought up to the same standards as London Overground, where every station is staffed. And that has been the most amazing success. The growth on that has been enormous. Those improvements will largely pay for themselves because more and more people will be able to use those services, which at the moment in South London in particular are a desert at night and basically a free service. So we need to address both those issues, policing and transport, to solve that problem.
Okay, thank you very much. We have about 5 minutes on the clock, 5 minutes before the money runs out and the meter and all the lights go off. I'm going to try and get one last quick question in, and it's from David Robinson, who I think runs Changing London.
The single issue which has attracted most attention on Changing London is a question about how do we make London a more friendly, collaborative, caring city. It's not just a nice to have. We know it affects crime rates, it affects our health, it even affects our economic prospects. So I'd like to know what our next mayor is going to do to make London a more neighbourly city.
So they're more neighbourly, more friendly and caring, which is not, these are not words normally associated with British politics, but you might be able to do something, Sadiq Khan.
Well, I mean, firstly, I mean, we need to recognise there are some things that even the best politician in the world can't do. What he or she can do, though, is to create an environment where things happen far easier. The phrase used by sociologists is social hubs, with social bridges, to get people who live busy lives, some are disparate, different backgrounds, some may be new arrivals to London, to meet together. It used to be the pub, the post office. Today it could be the mosque, it could be the community centre, it could be a place of work, it could be the tube, it could be the bus. I think you can change the culture in London. By the way, I don't accept, David, that everyone sees London as unfriendly. Capital cities, by definition, are very busy, hustling places. The average age of London is now 34. It's the youngest it's been in decades. And we need to recognise that actually, young people, big issue is quality of life. That includes addressing the housing crisis. That includes addressing the public transport fares crisis. That includes addressing the decent pay for a decent day's work crisis. That includes providing social places. Some of it is streets for young people to play around. Some of it is making sure we invest in youth centres. Some of it is making sure we invest in places where people can meet, whether it's the mosque, the church, the synagogue, or the temple. The key thing I say is this, David. Go back 10 years to a week after 7/7, when people predicted that we'd be turning against each other. People predicted there'd be a backlash and reprisals. And what Ken Livingstone did, both when he was in Singapore, but also when he was in Trafalgar Square a week after 7/7, reminded us that rather than turning against each other, we stood shoulder to shoulder and were united. As Mayor of London, I want to make sure we stay a united city, and I want to bring people even closer together so we can be a beacon, not simply for the rest of the country, but for the rest of the world as well.
Tessa.
Well, I talk in my campaign about building one London that recognises the risk that inequality and fracture poses to precisely what you're talking about, David. And I think that there are two drivers of this. One is what we saw during the Olympics, which was London open to the world. And London is an open city, a self-confident city that welcomes people from other parts of the world, that is pro-European, that creates the opportunity for people to come together as equals. That's one of the ways. We saw that during the Olympics, and as Sadiq says, we saw that in the immediate aftermath of 7/7. London has a very secure identity, I think, particularly at times of pressure and times of crisis. And it is an extraordinary and resilient humanity. But a lot of what you're talking about actually happens very locally, which is right to go right back to this evening. You know, play streets and the sense of communities, neighborhood festivals, the sense of communities being engaged with each other is so important. But it's also, we should also never forget that some of the unhappiest Londoners are young people who feel shut out of the opportunities in the greatest city in the world that always seem to belong to someone else. And that's what I want to address if I become mayor.
David?
The biggest threat to Londoners in terms of caring and neighbourliness must be the challenge to keep London the city of mixed communities. If you are decanting communities and driving them out of their areas through gentrification, you're destroying that neighbourliness. If politicians are using the phrase affordable rents but don't actually believe in council houses and social rents, you're destroying those communities. If you're driving people into private rented accommodation, which are seeing rents increase by 20% over 2 years in my London borough, 40% in another London borough, you're driving against that neighbourliness. So the next big challenge for the Mayor of London is surely housing. Stand up for council housing. Fight right to buy. Don't talk about affordable rents, talk about social rents. Let's have a register of private landlords. Do something about private buy-to-let that's actually inflating the market. I think there should be mortgage relief. And if people are buying homes off-plan in Malaysia and Singapore, then I'm afraid they can afford to pay more tax so we can actually build for ordinary Londoners. That's the challenge to whether we are a caring city or whether we're to go down the road of Paris. An inner London of the very wealthy, and everyone on this panel owns a home worth more than $750,000. And my office has checked. Everyone on this panel. So the bottom line is that's the threat to a London that cares. Do something about homes for ordinary Londoners.
Yours is in that bracket, right?
It is.
Okay, fair enough. Christian?
Over the past couple of years that I've been doing this, I've developed a framework for my policies, which is to make London more affordable, livable, and sustainable. And I believe that everything that a mayor needs to do ought to fit into that framework. And I'll give a couple of examples. First of all, we do need to tame the car. The car is a very destructive influence in a lot of places. So the play streets idea is absolutely right. In San Francisco, they did research to show that roads with greater numbers of cars, people know each other less. There's less links in those houses. So that's an absolutely very important thing that we ought not to prioritise. The thoroughfare aspect of streets, we ought to encourage the activity in streets. And I'd like to, in terms of housing, I totally agree. Housing is the big issue that will bind us together. And I'll just tell the story of one of the guys who works for me, Dan, who's a fantastic designer, who designed all this stuff on my website and all my leaflets. And so until recently, Dan was paying two-thirds of his income in rent, and clearly was absolutely struggling. And if we can't ensure that people like Dan, who are very talented, who are the future. Dan is 24 years old. They are the future of London. They are what will make London survive and thrive for the next generation. If we can't ensure that people like him are able to live in the city and able to set down roots and stay there, we will not have a London worth living in. So we have to do everything in our power as mayor and as other politicians to ensure that people like Dan can live here and thrive. Thank you.
Gareth Thomas.
David, as you know, I come from the co-op tradition, and it's not just building more housing that we have to commit to, important as that is. We have to commit to building more communities in which people can afford to live. And I take my inspiration from a remarkable organisation, almost as good as yours, Coin Street Community Builders, which on the south bank of the River Thames has completely regenerated the Oxo Tower, one of the most iconic symbols in South London. And in between the glitzy restaurants at the top and the coffee shops at the bottom are 5 floors of social housing. That social housing is run as co-op housing. The tenants set the rents and they also set the rules. And as well as the huge numbers of tourists who wander along the South Bank as a result, there is a vibrant community that looks after each other and sets rents at an affordable rent. That should be the inspiration going forward for the Mayor. But we've talked about the City of London and financial services in London. We could have more financial services that are owned and run by people across London. Credit unions. I'd like to see a credit union bank, bringing together the existing credit unions in London, backing them up with the power of a mayor in terms of advertising on the tubes and trains, bringing Londoners together to create their own financial services, setting interest rates at a rate which the credit union can afford and which the people who depend on the credit union can afford. We need new institutions like that to help Londoners come together. I agree with Tessa about the Olympics. It was a wonderful thing, but it was in the past. We need to look to the future. And that's why I say London should bid not only for the European City of Culture, but we should also build for the Commonwealth Games. Glasgow was great last year, but London could be even better. It could be a great friendly games, and it could encapsulate the spirit of London as it is at the moment, and extend that friendliness still further.
And finally, Diane Abbott.
I'm glad Christian is concerned about Dan. I'm concerned about Dan. I'm also concerned about Delroy and Amina and Abdul. The key to being an effective mayor of London is you care about all the communities, you bring them all together, and you do not allow any community to retreat into their silo, whether that silo is a coffee shop in Dalston or a temple in South London. David Cameron was talking today about fighting extremism and jihadism. He said some very interesting and important things, but as London mayor, I would be wary of any narrative which painted Muslims as the enemy within. Everything David said on housing was correct, and I think you may find I've been fractionally more consistent on these issues than other people have. But, you know, we have to care about all the communities, not just the Downs. We have to understand where they're coming from, their art, their culture, bring them all together. We have to fight social cleansing. And above all, we have to stand up for Londoners, rich and poor, whether they're called Dan or whether they're called Delroy, and take London forward. That is the mayor I would be.
Well, thank you very much for all of our candidates. Just before we go, I'm just going to get 15 seconds from each of our panellists, kind of an upsum as to whether you're impressed with what you've seen. Do Labour members and those who will take part in the primary have a good choice, do you think?
I think they've got a very good choice. I think that's a wide range. I think they're all quite different. Although, you know, they're stealing each other's policies, you've also got to think they're likely to be up against Zach Goldsmith. So in voting, people will have to think who is going to stand up best to him, because he'll be a superficially glamorous character, probably well backed by Linton Crosby.
We're glamorous.
All the dark.
I'm glamorous.
Yes,
I'm glamorous.
You're all super glamorous, and you've all got different strengths. I think it's going to be a difficult choice and a tough fight.
Good, Raphael.
Yeah, I agree entirely. It's fantastic. The choice of nuance, all very much around certain particular themes. My one concern is that those themes, they did start to feel a bit Zone 1, Zone 2 very often. And I would just warn everyone that London is much bigger than that. And I grew up in suburban London, and you know, it's probably, you know, there are those inner London boroughs, Labour as you like. Actually, Croydon, not so Labour. Finchley, where I grew up.
How about someone from Harrow?
Harrow, well, you know, and Ilford went Labour, but, you know, there are some...
Big up for Ilford.
London's bigger than Labour. Yeah. That's the one thing I would leave everyone with.
Okay, Tony Travis.
Well, it's good to have come to an event where all the candidates got to each idea first, which is very encouraging. Mathematically difficult, but everybody... I mean, I think on the point Rafa made earlier about business, it's going to be hard for the Labour Party in this campaign to put across its message about things like high pay and the approach of some businesses to paying taxes without still sounding slightly anti-business, and I think that needs to be moderated a bit, given that 90% of people in London, 85% of people in London work in the private sector. And my third thought really is that if you're looking for one thing that people, I think all of us feel occasionally in London, even though we love it, is slightly powerless. So if the mayor can do anything, it's how can the mayor make us as an individual, as part of the city, part of its ecology, feel we have a bit more power, somebody to go to who can change things when we want them to go, when we want something that's now going wrong to go right.
So that's the challenge. Before they really do throw us out, let me just quickly thank my panel, Raphael Bear, Polly Toynbee and Tony Travis. And here they are, the people who would run our city: David Lammy, Tessa Jowell, Sadiq Khan, Diane Abbott, Gareth Thomas and Christian Wolmar. I hope we've aided you in your decision as to how you might vote. I hope you will vote. I hope you'll come back and see us here at The Guardian as well. We have many events like this. You can see the list of them on membership at theguardian.com. Many and varied things, and we are open, as I said, and we love you to come in and see us. But now I'm reminded of that line. It may have been a famous philosopher, or it may have been the Blues Brothers who said, "You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here." So thank you for coming out. Thank you for joining us. Good night.